I went to visit my sister's newborn but found my husband kissing her forehead. "Our son will have your last name," my sister whispered. My husband replied, "Do not worry, Adeline will pay for our entire lives." I chose to stay silent, walked back to my car, and began preparing a gift. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to use you. My name is Adeline. I am 34 years old and the chief executive officer of a venture capital firm in Atlanta. Growing up, I was never the favorite. That title belonged to my younger sister Chloe, the golden child who could do no wrong. While I spent my youth studying and working multiple jobs to build my future, Chloe was handed everything on a silver platter by our mother Beatrice. Even as adults, nothing changed. I became the financial backbone of the family, the one expected to foot the bill for every lavish lifestyle choice they made to keep up appearances in the Atlanta high society scene. As a Black woman in the ruthless world of finance, I had to work 10 times harder just to get a seat at the table. I sacrificed my 20s. I sacrificed my peace of mind. I built a multi-million-dollar empire from the ground up, proving that Black excellence was not just a buzzword, but my everyday reality. But in my family, my success was never celebrated. It was simply expected. I was the strong Black woman who was supposed to carry everyone else's burdens without complaint, a role I played far too well for far too long. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I arrived at the private maternity hospital. The corridors of the VIP wing did not smell like a typical hospital. They smelled of fresh eucalyptus lavender and expensive floor wax. I had personally ensured Chloe had the best suite available. It was a massive corner room with panoramic windows overlooking the skyline and a private waiting area for guests. It cost me $5,000 a night, but I paid it without a second thought, because that is what I had been conditioned to do. Provide, protect, and pay. In my right hand, I carried a limited edition Hermes Birkin bag. It was a rare color, something I had to call in 3 favors and spend an exorbitant amount of money to secure. It was supposed to be a push present for my sister, a peace offering to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. In my left hand, I held a massive bouquet of white orchids. I was completely exhausted from a morning of brutal board meetings, but I put on my best supportive sister face as I approached room 412. The heavy mahogany door was left slightly open just enough for me to slip into the private anteroom unnoticed. I stepped inside intending to announce myself, but the sound of voices from the main suite stopped me dead in my tracks. It was my husband Marcus. Marcus was 36, a man who called himself a financial advisor, but who had not closed a real deal in 3 years. He played the part of the successful Atlanta businessman perfectly. He drove the right cars, wore the right watches, and knew exactly how to charm a room full of investors at the country club. But I was the one funding the illusion. I paid the mortgage on our Buckhead penthouse. I paid the lease on his luxury vehicle. I paid for the very air he breathed. I had justified it for years, telling myself that marriage was a partnership and that his big break was just around the corner. I had been an absolute fool. I peered through the crack in the door, expecting to see him holding his new nephew with the polite distance of an uncle. Instead, I saw a scene that made the blood freeze in my veins. Marcus was sitting on the edge of Chloe's hospital bed. He was not looking at the baby. He was looking at my sister. His hand was gently stroking her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw with an intimacy that sent a physical shockwave through my chest. He leaned down and pressed a long, lingering kiss to her forehead. Chloe gazed up at him, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. She reached up and touched his face. "Our son will have your last name," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but in the quiet of that sterile room, it echoed like a gunshot. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to pure ice. Our son. Marcus smiled, that same charming, perfectly practiced smile he used to convince the world he was a provider. He leaned closer to her and said, "Do not worry, baby. Adeline will pay for our entire lives. She always does." They laughed. It was a soft, shared chuckle between 2 people, who thought they had pulled off the ultimate heist. For a fraction of a second, the world tilted on its axis. Every memory of the past 2 years flashed through my mind in rapid succession. Marcus's late nights at the office when his firm had 0 active clients. Chloe's sudden, unexplained influx of cash that allowed her to maintain her luxurious lifestyle without holding down a job. The way they would exchange knowing glances at family dinners. The way my mother always insisted Marcus and Chloe spend time together while I was busy working late. It all crystallized into one sickening, undeniable truth. I had been actively funding my own betrayal. A weaker woman might have pushed the door open and screamed. A weaker woman might have dropped to her knees, thrown the orchids across the room, and demanded answers through a veil of heavy tears. A weaker woman might have let them see her break into a million pieces right there in the hospital room. But I did not build a venture capital empire in one of the most competitive cities in the country by breaking. I built it by observing, analyzing, and destroying my competition with absolute cold-blooded precision. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the anteroom. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, a profound and terrifying clarity washed over me. I looked through the crack in the door at Marcus's back. I recognized the fabric of his suit immediately. It was a bespoke Italian wool blend. I remembered the day he bought it. I remembered handing him my platinum credit card because his own account was overdrawn again. I looked at the extravagant floral arrangements filling Chloe's room. I had paid for those too. I looked at the baby wrapped securely in a cashmere blanket I had ordered custom from London. Everything they had, everything they were was because of me. They were parasites feeding off my hard work, using my wealth to build a secret life together, while treating me like an oblivious cash cow. They thought they had won. They thought my money was their money. I looked down at the Hermes bag in my hand. The smooth, expensive leather felt heavy and utterly absurd. It was a symbol of everything wrong with my life. A symbol of me constantly trying to buy love and respect from people who only saw me as a walking bank account. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to a family that was committed to misunderstanding me. Without making a sound, I turned around and walked out of the anteroom. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of my designer heels. I stepped back out into the bright eucalyptus-scented hallway. The air felt different now, less suffocating, more sharp. A few yards down the hall, there was a large stainless steel medical waste bin. I walked over to it with measured, deliberate steps. I did not hesitate for even a second. I opened the lid and dropped the limited edition Hermes bag straight into the trash. I tossed the expensive white orchids in right on top of it. Let them rot. I straightened my posture, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. The Adeline who walked into this hospital hoping for family connection was dead. The woman walking out was a chief executive officer preparing for a hostile takeover. They wanted my money. They wanted my life. They were about to learn exactly what happens when you try to steal from the person who owns the bank. I walked down the long corridor toward the elevators. My mind was already calculating the variables. I needed to isolate Marcus's access to my accounts. I needed to audit every single transaction he had made over the last 2 years. I needed to figure out exactly how much of my wealth had been funneled to my sister behind my back. I knew I had to move swiftly and silently. If they realized I knew the truth, they would scramble to hide whatever assets they had left. I had to let them continue to play their little game while I dismantled the entire board underneath them. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the parking garage. The polished metal doors began to close, shutting out the maternity ward and the 2 traders sitting inside it. Just as the doors sealed shut, the silence of the elevator was broken. My phone began to ring. The heavy steel door of the hospital parking garage sealed shut behind me, cutting off the sterile scent of the maternity ward. I walked toward my matte black SUV, the echo of my heels striking the concrete in a steady, unyielding rhythm. The Atlanta night was thick and humid, but inside my chest everything was absolute zero. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the leather steering wheel. The engine purred to life, a quiet roar of engineering that usually brought me peace. Tonight it was just background noise to the frantic calculations running through my mind. Before I could even shift into reverse, the harsh buzzing of my phone shattered the silence of the cabin. The digital display on the dashboard illuminated the dark interior. Beatrice, my mother. I stared at the glowing letters. In any normal family, a mother calling her eldest daughter while the youngest was in the hospital would be checking in. She would be asking if I had seen the baby, if Chloe was resting comfortably, if we were all sharing in the joy of new life. But the Wilsons were not a normal family, and Beatrice was certainly not a normal mother. I tapped the screen to answer, letting the Bluetooth connect through the car speakers. I did not even get the chance to say hello. Adeline, I need you to transfer $50,000 to Marcus's account immediately. There was no greeting, no inquiry about my day, just a sharp, authoritative demand echoing through the pristine acoustics of my vehicle. Her voice carried that familiar tone of entitled urgency, the exact pitch she used when ordering around the staff at her country club. I stared straight ahead at the concrete wall of the parking garage. $50,000. I kept my voice perfectly flat. And why exactly does my husband need a $50,000 transfer at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night? Beatrice sighed loudly, a dramatic exhalation meant to signal her impatience with my questioning. Because Julian is stuck with his cash flow again. You know how tight things are with his startup right now. You are the oldest sister, Adeline. It is your responsibility to step up. If you pay off that remaining $50,000 on Marcus's car loan, it frees up Marcus's credit line so he can pull a cash advance to lend to Julian. Chloe cannot be dealing with Julian's financial stress right now. She just gave birth, for heaven's sake. Have some sympathy. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Julian was Chloe's husband. He was a white old money heir from Savannah who paraded around Buckhead with his polo shirts and an unwarranted sense of superiority. He loved to remind everyone about his family lineage, yet his actual bank accounts were bleeding dry from his string of failed tech ventures. He was drowning, and my mother was actively orchestrating a financial bailout, using my money laundered through my cheating husband to save face for her precious golden child's failing marriage. And the sickening irony of it all. Marcus and Chloe had just created a child together right under Julian's nose, right under mine. Yet my mother was demanding that I fund the very husband being cuckolded just to keep Chloe's perfect upper-class facade intact. I wondered for a brief second how much Beatrice actually knew. Did she know the baby was Marcus's? Did she know she was asking the betrayed wife to finance the entire circus? It did not matter. Ignorant or complicit, Beatrice only saw me as one thing. I was the endless, bottomless wallet that funded the Wilson family's delusions of grandeur. For my entire adult life, I had been the silent benefactor. I bought the designer gowns Beatrice wore to her charity galas so she could outshine her friends. I funded the extravagant vacations they took without me while I worked 80-hour weeks managing venture capital portfolios. I paid the country club initiation fees so Julian could network with men who actually had real money. I was the designated workhorse, the strong black woman expected to carry the financial weight of an entire extended family while receiving absolutely zero respect in return. They took my money with one hand and slapped my face with the other, constantly reminding me that wealth could not buy the natural grace and charm that Chloe possessed. They thought my financial support was a given. They thought my silence was compliance. They thought I was blind to their sneers and deaf to their whispered insults. Adeline, are you listening to me? Beatrice's voice snapped sharply over the speakers. I need that transfer processed tonight. Julian has vendors threatening to sue him by tomorrow morning. Do not be selfish about this. You make more than enough to cover it without even feeling a dent. Marcus already agreed it was the best way to move the money quietly. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned ash white. Marcus already agreed. Of course he did. He was playing the benevolent brother-in-law with my money, keeping Julian afloat, so Julian would stay completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was having a baby with the very man funding him. It was a perfectly designed parasitic ecosystem. They were using my assets to build their secret lives, assuming I would simply sign the checks and ask no questions. I am not transferring the money, Mother. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Excuse me. I said no. You listen to me. Adeline. Beatrice began, her voice rising in pitch, practically vibrating with indignation. You will not disrespect me or this family. We need that money to maintain Julian's company. Do you want your sister to be embarrassed? Do you want her husband to file for bankruptcy the same week her son is born? You have an obligation. I reached out and pressed the red button on the dashboard screen. The call disconnected instantly. The sudden silence in the SUV was absolute and profound. I sat there in the quiet dark of the car. The ambient amber glow of the streetlights outside filtered through the tinted windows, catching the reflection of my face in the rearview mirror. I looked at my own eyes. There was no trace of the dutiful daughter left in them. There was no trace of the supportive wife. The warmth was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating void. The pain of the betrayal had instantly crystallized into something incredibly sharp and dangerous. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my generosity for stupidity. I picked up my phone and opened my encrypted contact list. I bypassed my assistant and scrolled straight to the name of my chief legal officer, David. He was a ruthless corporate shark who thrived on aggressive acquisitions and complex financial dismantlements. He was exactly the kind of man you wanted in your corner when you were preparing to go to war. The phone rang twice before he answered. Adeline, it is late. Is everything all right? I need you to mobilize the acquisitions team immediately, I said. My voice was steady, void of any emotional inflection. It was the voice I used when negotiating multi-million-dollar hostile takeovers. What is the target? David asked, instantly shifting into business mode. Julian Sterling, I replied. He runs a logistics startup called Sterling Innovations. He is currently drowning in debt. I want you to find every single outstanding loan, every line of credit, every vendor invoice, and every silent investor he owes money to. I do not care what premium you have to pay to expedite the process. I want my holding company to buy out all of his debt by tomorrow morning. There was a brief pause on the line as David processed the directive. You want to acquire his debt? Not the company. The company is worthless, I stated flatly, staring straight through the windshield into the concrete pillars of the garage. But the debt gives me absolute leverage. Buy it all, every last cent. When the sun comes up tomorrow, I want to be the sole owner of Julian's financial existence. I want to be his only creditor. When he breathes, I want him to know I own the air. Understood, David said, asking no further questions. Consider it done. The paperwork will be on your desk by 8 in the morning. Thank you, David. I ended the call. I placed the phone down on the passenger seat. My mother wanted me to bail out Julian. She wanted me to blindly transfer $50,000 to save his pride. I was going to do her one better. I was not just going to touch his debt. I was going to swallow it whole. By tomorrow, Julian would owe me his life. And when the time came to pull the rug out from under Marcus, and Chloe Julian would be my perfect, completely compromised pawn. The dominoes were officially set in motion. I shifted the car into drive, pulled out of the hospital parking garage, and drove into the dark Atlanta night, ready to burn my entire false life to the ground. The caterers moved through my living room like ghosts, balancing silver trays of caviar and gold leaf crostini. The sip and see party was in full swing, transforming my Buckhead mansion into a stage for the Atlanta elite. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a crystal flute of vintage champagne in my hand, watching the performance unfold. The house, the food, the staff, the very crystal they drank from, all of it, was paid for by the sweat of my brow. Yet as my family paraded through the room, they acted as if they were the lords of the manor. My mother Beatrice was holding court near the grand piano, showing off the newborn to a circle of my wealthy colleagues. Chloe sat on a velvet settee, looking perfectly radiant and tragically exhausted, playing the role of the glowing new mother. Marcus hovered near her, fetching her sparkling water, acting the part of the devoted uncle. It made my stomach turn, but my expression remained an impenetrable mask of serene hospitality. I had spent the last 72 hours finalizing the acquisition of Julian's corporate debt. The paperwork was locked in my wall safe upstairs. I was no longer just the sister or the wife. I was the executioner waiting for the drop. The tracking shot of my mind focused as Julian swaggered over. He held a glass of bourbon, his posture loose and arrogant, wearing a tailored blazer that I now knew he had purchased on credit. Julian was the epitome of unearned confidence. He slid into my personal space completely oblivious to the fact that I held the deed to his financial ruin. "Beautiful party," Adeline. Julian said, his Savannah drawl thick and patronizing. "It is so generous of you to open your home for Chloe and the baby. We all know how much she needs the support right now." I smiled, a tight, polite curve of my lips. "Family is everything, Julian. You know I would do anything for my sister." Julian took a slow sip of his bourbon, his pale eyes tracking the room. He leaned in closer, invading my space with the distinct smell of expensive cologne and cheap entitlement. "You know I have been reading up on the venture capital markets lately," he drawled. "It is fascinating how fast things are shifting. I was just telling Marcus the other day, it is incredible how quickly you climb the ladder at your firm. But then again, with all these new diversity and inclusion mandates, corporate America is practically bending over backward to put Black women in executive chairs." The camera angle shifts low, looking up at Julian. The framing amplifies his smug, condescending posture, projecting the sheer weight of his white male privilege as he stands in a house entirely funded by the Black woman he is currently insulting. He chuckled, a dry, abrasive sound. "It is a good time to be a minority hire, that is for sure. But when the market corrects itself, and it always does, companies will need to rely on the real business minds to navigate the storm. C-suite positions are nice for optics, but you should leave the real heavy-lifting business strategy to men like me and Marcus. We have the instinct for it. It is in our blood." The sheer audacity of his statement hung in the air. Julian, a man whose startup was currently drowning in $500,000 of debt, a man who survived solely on the illusion of his old money pedigree, was standing in my foyer drinking my liquor and telling me I was a diversity quota. He genuinely believed that his gender and his race granted him an inherent superiority over the woman who was quietly buying up his failures. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I slowly turned my gaze to Marcus, who had walked up just in time to hear the tail end of Julian's racist monologue. This was the moment a real husband would step in. A real partner would put his drink down, look the man in the eye, and demand respect for his wife. Marcus knew exactly how hard I had fought for my position. He knew the 80-hour weeks, the endless negotiations, the sleepless nights. Instead, Marcus adjusted his designer tie, looked at Julian, and let out a soft, agreeable laugh. "Come on, Julian," Marcus said, clapping the other man on the shoulder. "Do not give away all our trade secrets. Let the women enjoy their success. The market is tough enough without us men stepping on toes at family parties." Marcus grinned at me, a hollow, empty gesture that silently endorsed every single word Julian had just vomited into the space between us. My own husband, a Black man who relied entirely on my paycheck to fund his luxury car and his tailored suits, was publicly aligning himself with a failing white supremacist just to protect his own fragile ego. He was throwing me to the wolves, laughing as they circled all to maintain the boys' club camaraderie with the man whose wife he was secretly sleeping with. The betrayal was absolute. It was a secondary knife twisting right beside the first one. But the pain did not reach my heart. My heart was completely insulated by the cold, hard facts locked in my safe upstairs. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my vintage champagne. The bubbles popped against my tongue, crisp and freezing. I lowered the crystal flute and looked directly into Julian's eyes, then shifted my gaze to Marcus. My eyes were sharp, carrying the precise, lethal edge of a scalpel. "You are absolutely right, Julian," I said, my voice smooth as silk, dropping into a register so dangerously calm it should have triggered every survival instinct they possessed. Instinct is everything in business. Some men are born with it. Some men know exactly how to manage assets, how to stay afloat, and how to spot a bad investment before it bankrupts them. I took a step closer, my smile brightening into something predatory and absolute. "And some men," I continued, never looking away from him, "think they are swimming in deep water when they are actually drowning in a glass. It is always fascinating to see who actually owns the ocean when the tide finally rolls out." Julian frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second as his alcohol-soaked brain tried to parse the meaning behind my words. He did not know that his company's debt portfolio was currently resting under my name. He did not know that his creditors answered to me. He did not know that his entire existence was currently balanced on the tip of my finger. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden drop in temperature, but entirely ignorant of the cause. He reached out to touch my arm, playing the role of the affectionate spouse for the surrounding guests. "Are you okay, baby? You seem a little tense. Do you need to take a break from hosting?" I smoothly stepped out of his reach, ensuring his hand grasped nothing but empty air. "I am perfectly fine, Marcus," I replied, my voice projecting effortless grace to the room while delivering absolute ice to the two men standing before me. In fact, I have never felt more in control of my investments. "Enjoy the champagne, gentlemen. It is quite expensive. I would hate for a single drop to go to waste." Without waiting for a response, I turned on my heel and walked away. The camera tracks my movement, following my confident stride as I sliced through the crowd of Atlanta elite. I left them standing there, two arrogant men, clinking glasses, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already crumbled into dust. The glass doors slid open automatically, releasing me from the air-conditioned foyer into the stifling embrace of the Atlanta evening. My backyard had been completely transformed, bearing no resemblance to the quiet sanctuary I usually enjoyed after a grueling week on Wall Street. Floating lanterns cast a warm golden glow across the surface of the infinity pool. A string quartet, stationed near the manicured hedges, played smooth classical renditions of modern rhythm and blues. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, expensive catering, and the heavy, suffocating perfume of high society. I navigated the crowded patio, moving past the city elite. There were federal judges, neurosurgeons, and real estate moguls, all holding crystal glasses that I had paid for drinking vintage wine from a cellar I had stocked. Yet as I glided through my own property, the guests barely offered me a passing glance. Their attention, as always, was magnetized to the center of the terrace. My mother, Beatrice, was holding court. She stood on the raised stone platform near the edge of the pool, perfectly positioned, so the ambient lighting caught the diamonds at her throat. She cradled the newborn infant wrapped in an obscenely expensive cashmere blanket. A tight circle of Atlanta's most influential black women surrounded her, hanging onto her every word with rapt attention. I paused by a towering floral arrangement of white orchids, taking a slow sip of my champagne, and simply watched the performance. "Look at him!" Beatrice cooed, her voice pitched artificially high to ensure it carried over the soft music. "He is an absolute vision, the perfect blend." You can already see the strong, aristocratic lines of Julian's jaw, but he has Chloe's beautiful, flawless complexion. He is the ultimate modern child. Our families coming together like this, it is just a beautiful merging of heritage. A chorus of synchronized gasps and polite murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle of women. They leaned in, cooing at the bundled infant. I looked closely at the baby. It was staggering how deeply people could bury their heads in the sand when they desperately wanted to believe a specific narrative. The infant had no trace of Julian's thin, angular features. The child had a shock of dark, tightly coiled hair, deep brown skin that was already settling into a rich, warm hue, and a distinct, pronounced brow line. I knew that brow line. I had woken up next to it every morning for the last 5 years. That was Marcus's face. The baby was a miniature, undeniable replica of my husband. But Beatrice was entirely blinded by her own color-struck delusions. She wanted a mixed-race grandchild bound to Savannah old money so badly that she was actively projecting a white man's features onto a fully black child. "Chloe is a natural," Beatrice continued, pressing a manicured hand to her chest in a display of overwhelming maternal pride. "I was just telling the senator earlier, some women are simply born to be mothers. Chloe has always had that soft, nurturing spirit. She gave up so much of her own youthful freedom to build this family with Julian. She is the heart of our family now. She truly understands what it means to build a legacy." My jaw tightened, though my smile never faltered. A legacy. Chloe had never worked a day in her life. She had bounced from one meaningless vanity degree to another funded entirely by my bank account until she found Julian. And now she was building her legacy by passing off her brother-in-law's child as the heir to a crumbling tech startup. I stepped out from the shadow of the orchids and walked directly into the center of the circle. The women parted slightly, their polite smiles faltering as my presence interrupted the flawless stage play Beatrice had constructed. Adeline, my mother said. Her tone instantly dropped an octave, losing all the sweet melodic warmth she had just been projecting. The annoyance in her eyes was palpable. I was the dark cloud drifting over her sunlit parade. Mother, I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated. I see you are keeping the guest of honor highly entertained. The caterers are about to bring out the second round of hors d'oeuvres. I just wanted to ensure you had everything you needed. Beatrice shifted the baby in her arms, looking me up and down with a critical, dissecting gaze. You are wearing black to a sip and see, Adeline. It is terribly severe for a celebration of new life. But I suppose you came straight from the office. You always do put your spreadsheets before family milestones. A few of the women in the circle shifted uncomfortably, taking sips of their drinks. I smiled, a razor-thin expression that did not reach my eyes. Someone has to pay for the champagne, Mother. I would hate for the glasses to run dry while you celebrate Chloe's accomplishments. Beatrice's nostrils flared. She hated being reminded of our financial dynamic, especially in front of her peers. She quickly masked her anger with a condescending sigh, looking back at the women around her. Adeline has always been my pragmatic child, Beatrice announced to the group, patting the infant's blanket. She is completely married to her career. I stopped asking her for grandchildren years ago. Her maternal instincts went straight into her portfolios. It is a good thing we have Chloe to keep the family tree growing. Adeline simply does not have the temperament for raising children. She is far too calculating, too cold. She turned her gaze back to me, an imperious, dismissive look that I had endured since childhood. Adeline, since you are hovering, be a dear and go find one of the servers. We need more sparkling water over here. And check if Julian needs anything. He has been under so much stress lately providing for his new family. He deserves to be pampered tonight. I did not move. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, holding my mother's gaze. The silence stretched tight and dangerous. For 30 years I would have swallowed the insult. I would have turned around, found a waiter, and played the dutiful invisible shadow. I would have absorbed the humiliation to keep the peace. Instead, I raised my free hand and snapped my fingers. A waiter standing 10 feet away immediately rushed over, balancing a silver tray. Bring Mrs. Wilson a sparkling water, I instructed the waiter, my eyes never leaving my mother's face. And tell the kitchen staff to begin the dessert service. The waiter nodded quickly and darted off. Beatrice stared at me, her lips parted in slight shock at my blatant refusal to act as her errand girl. As for Julian, I said, taking another measured step forward, closing the distance between us. I leaned in, pitching my voice so only my mother and the women standing closest could hear the absolute finality in my tone. I think Julian is being taken care of exactly as he deserves. He has all the financial support he could ever dream of. You do not need to worry about his stress, Mother. I assure you I have taken a very personal interest in his accounts. I looked down at the bundle in her arms. The baby was sleeping, oblivious to the web of deceit and theft surrounding him. I reached out and gently brushed a finger against the soft, dark curl at the nape of the infant's neck. He truly is a beautiful boy, I murmured softly. He looks exactly like the man who made him. I pulled my hand back, offered the circle of women one last chilling smile, and turned to walk toward the far end of the pool. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Chloe standing near the outdoor bar. She was not glowing anymore. She was staring at me, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the marble counter so tightly her knuckles were white. She had seen me look at the baby. She had seen the recognition in my eyes. I raised my glass to her from across the terrace, took a final sip of champagne, and let the games begin. The golden hour had completely surrendered to a deep, velvety twilight, casting long shadows across the travertine patio. The string quartet seamlessly transitioned from smooth rhythm and blues into a lively, triumphant classical tempo, a prearranged signal that the climax of the evening had arrived. Beatrice clapped her hands together, the diamonds on her fingers catching the light as she herded the elite guests toward the center of the terrace. "It is time for the gifts," Beatrice announced, her voice ringing with practiced theatricality. "Let us shower this beautiful boy with the blessings he deserves." The crowd gathered around a massive glass-topped table overflowing with obscenely expensive offerings. There were sterling silver rattles from Tiffany hand-stitched cashmere garments from Paris, and miniature designer shoes that the child would outgrow in a matter of weeks. It was a grotesque display of shallow materialism, a mountain of velvet ribbons and glossy paper meant to showcase the wealth of the givers rather than provide anything of actual value to the infant. Julian stood proudly beside the table, one arm draped possessively around Chloe's waist. He was beaming, soaking in the admiration and the tangible proof of his supposed elevated status. Marcus stood just a few feet away, leaning against a stone pillar, watching the baby with a proprietary gleam in his eye that made my blood run cold. I waited patiently as the guests presented their gifts, enduring the endless chorus of exaggerated gasps and polite applause. When the final silver box was opened and the murmurs began to die down, I stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. The ambient chatter instantly hushed. "I believe it is my turn," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried absolute authority, cutting through the humid Atlanta air with crystalline clarity. I did not carry a gift bag. I held no pastel ribbons or glossy wrapping paper. Instead, I carried a sleek black leather folio bearing the embossed silver crest of my venture capital firm. I walked to the center of the patio, my posture rigidly perfect, and stopped directly in front of Julian and Chloe. When a new life enters this family, I began addressing the crowd, but keeping my eyes locked on my sister and her husband, it changes the entire dynamic. It forces us to look closely at our legacy. It forces us to examine what we are truly leaving behind for the next generation. Julian, Chloe, you have brought a unique child into this world, a child who represents the absolute, undeniable truth of our family lines. Beatrice nodded approvingly from the sidelines, completely missing the razor-sharp double meaning of my words. She placed a hand over her heart, playing the role of the touched matriarch. I opened the leather folio, revealing a stack of heavy watermarked legal documents. A silver Mont Blanc pen rested in the center bind. "Toys and clothes are lovely," I continued, my voice smooth and hypnotic. "But as the eldest sister, and as someone who understands the brutal realities of wealth preservation, I wanted to give my new nephew something permanent, something that cannot be outgrown. I have established an irrevocable trust fund for the boy, seated today with exactly $1 million. A collective synchronized gasp rippled through the crowd of federal judges and real estate tycoons. Even in this circle of wealth, $1 million cash deposit for an infant was a staggering display of financial dominance. The reaction from my family was immediate and visceral. Beatrice practically vibrated with pride, looking around at her friends as if she had personally earned the money and written the check. Julian's arrogant facade cracked, replaced instantly by a look of ravenous greed. His eyes widened, completely fixated on the leather folio. His logistics startup was hemorrhaging cash, his creditors were circling, and here I was handing him a life raft woven from solid gold. He was already calculating how he could leverage his son's trust to bail out his own sinking ship. Marcus stepped forward, abandoning his casual lean against the pillar. His eyes were wide with shock, but a greedy, satisfied smirk quickly crawled across his face. He looked at the baby, then at the documents, clearly thrilled that his biological son was just gifted a fortune by his oblivious, hard-working wife. "It is incredibly generous." Adeline. Julian breathed out his Savannah drawl, losing all of its previous condescension. He reached out his fingers, twitching toward the folio. "Truly, this is beyond words. We are so grateful." The man who had just insulted my race, My gender and my professional qualifications less than an hour ago was now practically salivating over the wealth those very qualifications had built. There are just a few formalities, I said, pulling the folio back slightly, keeping it out of his eager grasp. Because this is a substantial corporate transfer, the board requires the immediate guardians to sign the establishment and authorization papers tonight to activate the escrow account. Furthermore, I added, turning my gaze to my husband, because the funds are tethered to my personal wealth management portfolio, I need the designated family financial custodian to sign as the witnessing trustee. Marcus, since you manage our joint private accounts, that responsibility falls to you. Marcus puffed out his chest, adjusting his suit jacket. The sheer arrogance radiating from him was nauseating. He felt important. He felt powerful. He felt like he had completely won. Of course, Adeline, Marcus said, stepping up beside Julian. Whatever you need to secure the boy's future. I unclipped the Mont Blanc pen and held it out. Julian snatched it first. He did not read a single line of the document. He did not scan the clauses, the stipulations, or the legal definitions. He was blinded by the string of zeros printed on the first page. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line with aggressive enthusiasm, legally binding himself as the father and guardian of the trust. He handed the pen to Chloe. She hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the silver barrel. Her eyes darted from the papers up to my face. She looked for a trace of suspicion, a hint of malice, but I gave her nothing but a serene, encouraging smile. The allure of the $1 million, the promise of absolute financial security, was too strong for her to resist. She swallowed hard and signed her name gracefully next to Julian's. Finally, she passed the pen to Marcus. My husband took the document, completely oblivious to the trap he was walking into. He signed his name with a bold, heavy flourish on the trustee line, officially tying his legal identity to the financial oversight of his own illegitimate child. I watched the ink dry on the thick paper. None of them had bothered to flip to the second page. None of them had bothered to read Section 4, Paragraph B, buried deep within the dense legalese of the trust charter. If they had, they would have seen the specific non-negotiable contingency clause I had instructed David to draft. The text was explicitly clear. The activation, maintenance, and distribution of the trust funds were strictly contingent upon absolute biological verification. To prevent any breach of moral and ethical corporate codes, a certified independent DNA test confirming the child's paternal lineage had to be submitted and validated within 30 days of signing. Any discrepancy, fraud, or misrepresentation of paternity would not only void the trust in its entirety, but would legally categorize the signatories as perpetrators of financial fraud. The clause explicitly stated that in the event of a failed biological verification, the signatories, Julian, Chloe, and Marcus, would be held personally, legally, and financially liable for massive corporate penalties and immediate restitution. They had not just signed a birthright. They had signed a legally binding confession to their own destruction. Marcus handed the pen back to me, grinning like a proud father. All done, babe. I took the pen deliberately, avoiding brushing his skin. I closed the leather folio, the heavy magnetic clasp snapping shut with a sharp, definitive click that echoed over the soft music of the string quartet. Thank you, I said, my voice dropping to a low, resonant hum. The paperwork is finalized. The future is entirely secured. I looked down at the 3 signatures. The arrogant scrawl, the trembling cursive, the bold print. 3 absolute fools who thought they were playing a game I did not know the rules to. I lifted my eyes and met Chloe's gaze. The color had suddenly drained from her face. The realization that I had never been this aggressively generous without a heavily calculated reason was finally starting to dawn on her. The panic she had managed to suppress all evening came rushing back, flooding her eyes with pure, unadulterated dread. I offered her a final, chilling smirk, a silent promise of the devastation that was about to rain down on her perfect stolen life. Enjoy your evening, I announced to the crowd, tucking the folio safely under my arm. Tomorrow is going to be a very big day for all of us. The transition from the suffocating humidity of my backyard to the sterile, freezing environment of my corporate office felt like stepping into a different dimension. The camera revolves in a slow, continuous 360-degree dolly shot. The framing isolates me in the center of my domain. The 72nd floor of my venture capital firm offers an uninterrupted panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, a sprawling grid of glass and steel that I had conquered through sheer unrelenting force of will. But this morning my eyes are locked entirely on the digital projections illuminating the frosted glass surface of my desk. I am not looking at the city. I am looking at a crime scene. David, my lead forensic accountant, stands to my left. He is a man who speaks fluent binary, a predator whose weapon of choice is a spreadsheet. To my right stands Sarah, the head of my corporate espionage and risk management division. They are silent, waiting for my command. The air in the office is absolute zero. Pull up the personal joint accounts, I ordered, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. Show me the exact timeline. David tapped his tablet. A massive, complex web of financial transactions materialized on the main screen. Red lines jagged across the digital display, highlighting anomalies that to an untrained eye would look like standard portfolio rebalancing. But I did not have an untrained eye. I built algorithms that could spot a fraudulent cent in a billion-dollar merger. Marcus was a fool to think he could steal from a woman who engineered financial ecosystems for a living. It started exactly 14 months ago, David said, his tone clinical. Right around the time Chloe would have announced her pregnancy to the inner circle. The initial withdrawals were small, 10,000 here, 15,000 there. He disguised them as routine capital injections into your secondary real estate holding accounts. He knew you rarely scrutinized the lower-yield property maintenance logs. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. Marcus had used my grueling 80-hour work weeks as a shield. He assumed my exhaustion was a blind spot. Trace the routing numbers, I said. Where did the capital injections actually go? Sarah stepped forward, bypassing the standard financial software and opening an encrypted tracking program. Marcus was careful, but he is not a professional. He routed the stolen funds through a series of offshore phantom accounts, bouncing the money from the Caymans to a server in Delaware to wash the digital footprint. But money never truly vanishes. It always leaves a shadow. She pressed a key and the red lines converged onto a single blinking node on the screen. The funds were ultimately deposited into a corporate shell company, Sarah explained. It is registered under the name New Horizon LLC. I stared at the name. New Horizon. It was almost laughable. Marcus and Chloe were funding their illicit new life, their new horizon, using the very empire I had built to sustain them. Total amount siphoned to date, I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. David did not hesitate. $485,000. The number hung in the freezing air of the office. Nearly $500,000 stolen directly from my personal reserves. I did not flinch. I did not cry. The betrayal was an absolute cold certainty that calcified my heart into solid granite. This was no longer just an affair. This was not simply a matter of a broken vow or a secret child. This was premeditated, systematic financial warfare. Marcus had weaponized my trust to bleed me dry. Open the expenditure logs for New Horizon LLC, I commanded. I want to see exactly what I have been paying for. Sarah rapidly typed a sequence of commands. A detailed, itemized list flooded the screen. I scanned the lines of data, my eyes absorbing the sheer audacity of their theft. New Horizon LLC was the invisible engine running Julian and Chloe's entire manufactured reality. I saw the exorbitant invoices for the private concierge maternity suite where Chloe had given birth. I saw the recurring $50,000 monthly payments routed directly into the operating accounts of Julian's failing tech startup, keeping his company artificially afloat so he could continue playing the successful CEO. I saw the receipts for the vintage Porsche Julian drove, the designer maternity wardrobe Chloe flaunted at the country club, and the rare imported nursery furniture they had proudly shown off on social media. Every single facet of their glamorous, aristocratic Savannah lifestyle was a direct result of Marcus plundering my bank accounts. Marcus was financing his lover and his biological son by propping up the very man who constantly insulted him. The psychological sickness of it all was staggering. Marcus was paying for Julian to play the role of the wealthy patriarch, all to keep his affair with Chloe hidden in plain sight. And Julian, blinded by his own arrogance and desperation, likely had no idea where the mysterious New Horizon LLC investor funds were actually coming from. Julian thought he had secured a silent venture angel. He did not know his silent partner was the man sleeping with his wife. They are entirely dependent on this shell company, David noted, pointing to a severe dip in Julian's corporate profit margins. If New Horizon LLC stops pumping liquidity into Julian's startup, his company faces immediate insolvency within 14 days. He has leveraged all his remaining personal assets against the business. If the startup folds, Julian goes personally bankrupt. And what about the legal structure of New Horizon LLC? I asked, my eyes tracing the digital money trail. Who is the registered managing director? Sarah pulled up the incorporation charter. That is where Marcus made his fatal error. Because he needed to maintain absolute secrecy from Julian, he could not use a proxy. He registered New Horizon LLC under his own legal identity. He is the sole proprietor and the managing director. He holds all the financial liability. A slow, predatory smile curved the edges of my lips. The trap was so perfectly constructed that I almost admired the sheer irony of it. Marcus had built the guillotine, climbed onto the platform, and handed me the rope. By signing those trust fund documents last night, Marcus had legally bound himself as the financial custodian of an account that explicitly required an ethical biological verification. He had walked right into a federal fraud snare. But this new revelation gave me the power to utterly annihilate him before the trap even snapped shut. He stole $500,000 to build a glass house, I murmured, standing up from my desk. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the city far below. The traffic looked like tiny, insignificant insects, and now I am going to shatter every single pane of glass. David, I said, turning back to my team, I want you to freeze the joint accounts. Do not lock them completely. Just implement a security hold that requires my physical dual authorization for any withdrawal over $500. Let Marcus try to run his credit card at his favorite steakhouse and watch it decline. David nodded, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. Sarah! I continued, my voice ringing with absolute lethal authority. I want you to initiate a hostile corporate audit of Julian's tech startup. Since my firm now officially holds the majority of his corporate debt, we have the legal right to demand an immediate review of his operating capital. I want you to squeeze his accounts. Demand proof of revenue. I want Julian to panic. I want him to run to his silent investor at New Horizon LLC, begging for a cash injection to cover the audit. And when Marcus tries to access the stolen funds to save Julian, Sarah asked, a sharp, knowing gleam in her eye. He will find the well completely dry, I replied softly. I want you to quietly flag New Horizon LLC for suspected corporate money laundering. Alert the Federal Banking Commission anonymously. Freeze the shell company assets, pending a full federal review. The strategy was flawless. Marcus would be trapped. Julian would demand money to save his company from my audit. Marcus would try to pull the funds from our joint account only to find himself locked out. He would then try to access the reserves in New Horizon LLC, only to discover the federal government had frozen the shell company for money laundering. Marcus would be utterly paralyzed, unable to save his lover's husband, unable to fund his secret child, and unable to hide his crimes. They had treated me like a silent, compliant bank. They had mistaken my quiet dedication for stupidity. They genuinely believed that because I operated with grace, I was incapable of violence. Prepare the briefs, I told my team, walking back to my desk and pressing my palms flat against the cool glass. By the end of this week, New Horizon is going to burn to the ground, and I want front row seats to the ashes. The digital display on my desk shifted from a web of red lines to a single urgent alert. David tapped his tablet, his eyes narrowing at the fresh data stream pouring across the frosted glass. "We have a new development," David said, his voice cutting through the sterile silence of my office. "Marcus just initiated a massive wire transfer from the New Horizon LLC accounts. It seems he triggered the request moments before the federal freeze fully locked down the shell company." I did not blink. I kept my eyes on the blinking notification. "How much and where is it going?" $250,000, David replied, pulling up the routing information. "It is coded as an escrow deposit for a residential real estate transaction. The receiving account belongs to a boutique luxury brokerage called Prestige Properties. They specialize in secluded high-end estates in the Sandy Springs area." I leaned forward, bracing my hands against the cool glass of my desk. A house. Marcus was using my money to buy Chloe a house. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the move sent a spike of cold adrenaline straight into my veins. He was not just funding her lifestyle. He was building them a sanctuary, a secret domestic paradise, where they could play house with their illegitimate child, all entirely subsidized by my paycheck. "Stop the wire," Sarah suggested, her fingers already hovering over her keyboard. "I can intercept the transfer and route it back into the secure holding account before Prestige Properties even registers the pending transaction. We can cut them off right now." "No," I commanded, raising a hand to halt her. Both David and Sarah looked at me, momentarily confused by my deviation from our usual aggressive asset protection protocols. I stared at the property details materializing on the screen. It was a stunning Mediterranean-style villa hidden behind heavy iron gates. 5 bedrooms, a marble courtyard, and a custom-built nursery suite. It was the perfect isolated love nest. "If we block the wire, Marcus will panic immediately," I explained, my voice dropping into a lethal calculating rhythm. "He will know the accounts are compromised, and he will go to ground. He will try to find another way to hide the remaining assets. We are not going to stop him from buying this house. We are going to let him buy it." I turned to Sarah, a predatory smile curving my lips. "In fact, I want you to ensure that wire clears all the security protocols flawlessly. Let the money hit the brokerage account. Let them think they have won." 10 miles away in the affluent, quiet enclave of Sandy Springs, the heavy oak doors of the villa swung open. Marcus stepped into the grand foyer, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride, leading Chloe by the hand. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the imported Italian marble floors and the sweeping curved staircase. "Oh, Marcus!" Chloe breathed out, her eyes wide with greedy wonder as she spun around the empty, cavernous space. "It is absolutely magnificent. It is even better than the listing photos." Marcus smiled, a smug, self-satisfied expression that perfectly masked the fact that he was paying for this luxury with stolen funds. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her neck. "I promised I would take care of you, didn't I?" he murmured softly. "I promised I would give you and the boy a real home, a place where we do not have to hide." Chloe leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. She ran her hand over the smooth, polished banister. "But what about Julian? What if he finds out about this place? He thinks the startup is bleeding cash. If he sees me coming here, he will ask questions." Marcus chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Let me worry about Julian. He is too busy trying to keep his failing company afloat to notice anything else. Besides, this property is being purchased through an anonymous corporate trust. My name is not on the public deed, and yours certainly is not. As far as the world is concerned, this is just a corporate asset holding. We are completely untraceable." Back in the freezing climate of my office, I was looking at the exact corporate asset holding Marcus thought was so impenetrable. "David," I said, pointing to the name of the real estate brokerage on my screen. "Prestige Properties. What is their current market valuation?" David's fingers flew across his tablet. "They are a small elite firm, high margin, low volume. They currently hold 12 active premium listings, including the Sandy Springs Villa. Their total corporate valuation is roughly $8 million, but their liquidity is currently strained due to a recent bad commercial investment. They are highly leveraged." "Excellent," I murmured. I walked back to my desk and picked up my secure phone. I pressed the speed dial for my lead corporate acquisitions attorney. We are going to buy them, I announced to my team. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You want to buy the house? I looked at her, my eyes flat and merciless. No. I want to buy the entire real estate brokerage. I want Vanguard Holdings, our shadow subsidiary, to initiate an immediate aggressive cash buyout of prestige properties. Offer them 20% above their market valuation for an expedited closed-door acquisition. I want the firm absorbed, the contracts transferred, and the deeds reassigned to Vanguard by the end of the business day. David let out a low whistle, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of the trap I was constructing. If Vanguard buys prestige properties, then Vanguard becomes the primary lien holder and legal owner of all their active assets, including the Sandy Springs villa. Exactly, I replied, a dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. Marcus thinks he is buying a secret house using my money. He does not realize that he is literally handing the down payment right back to me. Let him sign the escrow papers. Let him move her in. I want them to decorate the nursery. I want them to fill the wine cellar. I want them to feel completely undeniably secure in their beautiful new home. And then I added, my voice turning into a blade of pure ice. When the time is right, I am going to serve my own husband and my sister with eviction papers for trespassing on my private property. The real estate agent, a perfectly groomed woman with a clipboard and a bright, rehearsed smile, walked into the living room of the Sandy Springs villa. She found Marcus and Chloe admiring the view of the private garden from the French doors. It truly is a spectacular property, the agent cooed, stepping forward to interrupt their intimate moment. The privacy here is unparalleled. Are we ready to move forward with the preliminary closing documents? Marcus turned, projecting the aura of a wildly successful titan of industry. We are ready, he said smoothly. The wire transfer for the initial $250,000 deposit was initiated an hour ago. It should be clearing your accounts as we speak. The agent checked her tablet, her bright smile widening into something genuinely ecstatic. Yes. I see the confirmation right here. The funds have been successfully received and placed into escrow. We can proceed with the final signatures. She led them to the massive kitchen island, spreading out the thick stack of legal documents. Marcus took the pen she offered, his posture radiating unearned triumph. He was buying a castle. He was providing for a secret family. He was outsmarting the brilliant, calculating wife who supposedly paid attention to everything. He leaned over the marble counter and signed his name on the dotted line. He signed away the stolen funds, officially executing the transfer. He handed the pen back to the agent, completely unaware that he had just finalized a transaction that legally transferred the property directly into my corporate portfolio. Congratulations, sir, the agent said, gathering the papers and sliding a heavy set of brass keys across the marble counter. The property is yours. You can begin moving in immediately. Chloe let out a squeal of delight, throwing her arms around Marcus's neck. We did it, she whispered fiercely. We finally have our own place. Marcus held her tightly, staring over her shoulder at the luxurious living room. We have everything we ever wanted, he replied softly. In my office, the massive digital screen on the wall shifted. The red lines tracking the wire transfer faded, replaced by a solid bold green notification. It was a secure message from my acquisitions attorney. The cash buyout of prestige properties had been finalized. The expedited paperwork had been pushed through the private channels I controlled. Vanguard Holdings was now the absolute, uncontested owner of the brokerage and all its physical assets. A digital copy of the property deed for the Sandy Springs villa materialized on my desk screen. The former owner's name was struck through. In its place, the name Vanguard Holdings, LLC, was printed in bold black letters. I owned the walls, the roof, the custom nursery, and the imported marble floors. I owned the very ground Marcus and Chloe were currently celebrating on. I reached out and traced my finger over the digital signature on the screen. The trap was set. The bait had been swallowed whole. They were locked inside a cage of their own making, gleefully decorating the bars, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the only key. Let them enjoy the weekend. I instructed my team, turning away from the screen to look back out at the Atlanta skyline. Let them move their things in. Let them pop a bottle of champagne in their new living room. We will proceed with the hostile audit of Julian's company on Monday morning. By Tuesday, the federal freeze on New Horizon will be fully enforced. I picked up my own glass of water, taking a slow, measured sip. The water was ice cold, perfectly matching the temperature of my blood. They wanted a new horizon, I murmured into the quiet office. Let us see how they handle the dark. Monday morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of an executioner's blade. I sat at the head of the polished obsidian conference table in my firm's executive suite, surrounded by my legal team and senior analysts. The digital displays around the room were no longer tracking Marcus's stolen funds. They were focused entirely on Julian's tech startup. Julian's company, a supposedly revolutionary logistics software platform, was a masterclass in catastrophic mismanagement. He had burned through his initial venture capital in less than 18 months. Instead of prioritizing back-end development or securing viable beta testers, Julian had poured millions into creating the illusion of success. The financial logs displayed on the screen showed exorbitant leases for prime downtown office space, custom-imported ergonomic furniture for a staff that barely existed, and aggressive glossy public relations campaigns for a software product that was riddled with fatal coding errors. Julian was not an entrepreneur. He was a cosplayer desperately acting out the role of a tech visionary, while his company hollowed out from the inside. When the initial funding dried up, Julian refused to downsize or admit failure. He could not stomach the humiliation. Instead, he had leveraged his family's historic Savannah name to secure a series of high-interest short-term loans from private lenders and boutique credit firms. He was playing a dangerous, accelerating game of financial roulette, borrowing from one lender to pay the interest on another, entirely dependent on the illusion of his old money pedigree to keep the wolves at bay. He believed his last name made him untouchable. David slid a thick, consolidated portfolio across the dark glass of the table. Over the weekend, my acquisitions team had moved with surgical precision. They had quietly approached every single one of Julian's private lenders. We offered them a clean, immediate buyout of Julian's promissory notes at a slight premium. For lenders dealing with a high-risk hemorrhaging startup run by a man more concerned with country club mixers than profit margins, it was an irresistible exit strategy. They took our cash and ran transferring the debt titles directly to my firm's holding accounts. I picked up my Mont Blanc pen, the heavy silver barrel cool against my fingers. I did not rush. I took my time reading over the final transfer agreements. Julian had been so desperate for cash injections that he had signed away egregious personal guarantees. His vintage cars, his shares in his family's legacy trust, even the equity in the home he shared with Chloe, it was all tied into the collateral of these loans. He had blindly signed away his entire existence to maintain his facade. With a single fluid stroke of ink, I executed the final document. The scattered, fragmented debt of Julian's company was instantly unified under my complete solitary control. I was no longer just his sister-in-law. I was his sole, undisputed creditor. I held the power to call in the entirety of his corporate debt at a moment's notice. The second I triggered the collection clause, his company would be forced into immediate catastrophic liquidation. His personal assets would be seized, his credit obliterated, and his carefully curated image of the successful aristocratic entrepreneur would be ground into absolute dust. He was a king ruling over a castle of cards, and I controlled the wind. I closed the portfolio, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the desk. The sheer magnitude of the leverage I now held was intoxicating, a cold, heavy power that settled deep in my chest. Julian was bleeding cash daily, completely unaware that his life support lines were now plugged directly into my mainframe. He would wake up this morning, put on a tailored suit he could not afford, and swagger into a failing office that I technically owned. The intercom on the conference table buzzed a sharp, intrusive sound that broke the heavy, calculating silence of the room. It was Sarah calling from the outer reception desk. Her voice was perfectly level, maintaining her professional composure, but I could detect the faint underlying edge of urgency in her tone. "Adeline? I apologize for the interruption," Sarah said through the speaker, "but we have a situation in the main lobby. Your mother is here. She bypassed the ground floor reception desk and is currently arguing with the building's security team. She is demanding to see you immediately and is making quite a public spectacle. The room went entirely still. My legal team exchanged cautious, silent glances, fully aware of the toxic family dynamics at play. Beatrice detested my office. She viewed the financial district and my corporate environment in particular as a gritty, unseemly place, far beneath the dignified, quiet wealth of her social circles. For her to show up unannounced, abandoning her carefully constructed decorum to argue with security guards in a commercial lobby meant only one thing. The tremors of my weekend maneuvers had reached her. Someone was panicking. Perhaps Marcus had attempted to access the frozen joint accounts and hit the authorization wall. Perhaps Julian's bank had flagged the sudden transfer of his massive debt portfolio and sent him into a blind panic. Whatever the trigger, the resulting shockwave had sent them scrambling, and they had immediately deployed the family matriarch to restore order and force my compliance. They expected me to fold. They expected the dutiful, overlooked daughter to cower the moment Beatrice raised her voice. I looked down at the finalized debt portfolio resting under my hands, then up at the panoramic view of the city skyline. The board was perfectly set. Every piece was exactly where I needed it to be locked into a trajectory of absolute ruin. Marcus was trapped in his fraudulent real estate snare, proudly polishing the bars of his own cage. Julian was financially tethered to my absolute mercy, completely stripped of his unearned autonomy. And now the woman who had orchestrated my lifetime of marginalization, the architect of my sister's toxic entitlement, was breaking down my front door. "Let her up!" I instructed Sarah, my voice dropping into a register of terrifying calm. "Tell security to step down and escort her directly to my private office suite. Do not offer her coffee. Do not offer her water. Just bring her to me." I stood up from the conference table, smoothing the flawless lines of my tailored blazer. "David, clear this room. I want to greet my mother alone." I gathered the files, the heavy, tangible proof of my family's imminent destruction, and walked back toward my private office. I positioned myself behind the massive frosted glass desk, turning my chair slightly to face the heavy oak double doors. The net was fully woven, pulled tight and secure across every escape route they possessed. All that was left was to watch the final prey walk willingly into the center of the trap. The heavy oak doors to my private suite flew open with a violent crack that echoed off the glass walls. Beatrice stepped over the threshold, moving with the imperious stride of a woman who believed the entire world existed solely to accommodate her whims. She wore a pristine Chanel suit, her hair immaculately styled, presenting a stark contrast to the sheer ugliness of the entitlement radiating from her every movement. Sarah stepped back, her expression carefully neutral, and quietly pulled the doors shut behind her, leaving me alone with my mother in the freezing silence of the executive suite. Beatrice did not pause to admire the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. She did not acknowledge the sheer scale of the financial empire I had built from the ground up. To her, my 72nd floor office was merely an inconvenience, a dirty commercial space she had to endure to extract exactly what she wanted. She marched directly toward my frosted glass desk, dropping her heavy designer handbag onto the immaculate surface. The sharp clatter of hardware against glass grated on my nerves, but I did not blink. I remained standing, my hands resting lightly near the leather portfolio containing Julian's consolidated corporate debt. "You are impossible to reach, Adeline." Beatrice snapped, completely ignoring standard greetings. "I have been calling your personal line all morning. Your assistant had the audacity to ask if I had an appointment. I am running a global venture capital firm." "Mother," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "My schedule is not a suggestion. What is the emergency that required you to harass building security?" Beatrice scoffed, waving a manicured hand as if swatting away a fly. She dismissed my life work in a single careless gesture. "Do not use that cold corporate tone with me. We have a pressing family matter to discuss, and I will not wait for your secretary to pencil me in." She began to pace across the Persian rug, refusing to sit in the plush guest chairs. "It is about Chloe," She is exhausted, Adeline. The stress of managing a new household and a newborn is taking a terrible toll on her health. Julian is working constantly to build his legacy, and the poor girl needs a creative outlet. She needs something to call her own so she does not lose her mind. I watched her performative concern, feeling the absolute zero temperature of my heart drop even further. Chloe, the sister who is currently moving into a stolen luxury villa funded by my adulterous husband, supposedly needed a creative outlet. And how exactly does Chloe's need for a hobby involve me disrupting my workday? I asked, my tone dangerously flat. Beatrice stopped pacing and planted her hands on her hips. She looked across the desk at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated expectation. I have found the perfect commercial space for her to open a luxury wellness spa. It is right in the heart of Buckhead. It has high foot traffic, an affluent demographic, and flawless zoning. It requires zero renovation and is ready for immediate occupancy. She paused, her eyes narrowing with calculated intent. The property is currently held by Vanguard Holdings, your subsidiary. The sheer audacity of the demand was breathtaking. Vanguard Holdings was the exact shadow subsidiary I had just used hours ago to purchase Chloe and Marcus's illicit love nest in Sandy Springs. Beatrice had absolutely no idea about the depth of my corporate reach or my current maneuvers, but she knew enough to recognize when I owned a piece of prime real estate she wanted to harvest. That commercial property in Buckhead is a Tier 1 asset, I stated, keeping my voice utterly level. It generates millions in annual leasing revenue. It is a cornerstone of my domestic portfolio. It is not a playground for someone looking for a distraction. Beatrice's face flushed with immediate anger. The mask of the concerned mother vanished entirely, replaced by the toxic, demanding matriarch I had known my entire life. She leaned heavily over my desk, invading my space, her voice dropping into a vicious, venomous register. It is a building, Adeline. Just a building. Chloe is your sister, and she is bringing new life into this family. She pointed a sharp, perfectly polished fingernail directly at my chest. Chloe is under so much pressure being a mother. You are infertile. What are you going to do with all those assets? Take them to the grave. You must know how to sacrifice for your sister. The words struck the air like a physical whip. For a fraction of a second, the phantom pain of years of failed medical treatments, of silent, agonizing grief, and of desperately empty nurseries flared hot in my chest. Beatrice had deliberately weaponized my deepest, most private trauma, wielding my infertility as a blunt instrument to extort real estate for her golden child. She did not know that Chloe's precious child actually belonged to my husband. She only knew that I was biologically broken, and therefore my hard-earned resources should be stripped away to comfort the sister who was whole. The cruelty was so absolute, so distilled and pure, that it instantly eradicated any lingering, microscopic trace of familial loyalty I might have still harbored. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I simply looked at the woman who had birthed me, realizing she was nothing more than a parasite wearing maternal clothing. You want me to sign over a multi-million-dollar commercial asset in Buckhead so Chloe can play spa director? I clarified, my voice echoing off the glass walls with terrifying calm. You believe my lack of biological children mandates me to finance her lifestyle indefinitely. Beatrice stood up straight, misinterpreting my icy calm for eventual compliance. It is the right thing to do, Adeline. You have more money than you could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. You do not have a real family to pass it down to. Chloe does. Julian is building a legacy, and they need this stepping stone to secure their future. Family supports family. Julian is building a legacy, I repeated softly. My fingers brushed the edge of the leather portfolio on my desk, the physical proof that Julian was building nothing but a mountain of catastrophic debt that I now entirely owned. And Marcus. What does Marcus think of this grand plan to surrender my assets? Beatrice rolled her eyes, thoroughly annoyed by the mere mention of my husband. Marcus is your husband, Adeline. His job is to support you quietly, just as your job is to support your sister. I do not care what Marcus thinks. I care that Chloe is happy and provided for. I have the transfer documents already drafted by the family lawyer. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto my desk, right next to Julian's debt portfolio. Sign them, now. I promised Chloe I would have the keys for her by this weekend. I looked down at the manila envelope. The arrogance was almost poetic. They were trying to rob me in broad daylight while simultaneously robbing me in the dark. I slowly stood up to my full height. I picked up my silver Mont Blanc pen. Beatrice crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk settling onto her features. She genuinely thought she had won. She thought the old tactic of crushing my self-worth had worked exactly as it always had throughout my childhood. I did not touch her envelope. Instead, I pressed a button on my desk console. Sarah, I said into the intercom, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. Please come into the office. The heavy oak doors opened instantly. Sarah stepped in, her posture rigid and professional. Yes, Adeline. My mother is just leaving, I said, my gaze locked entirely on Beatrice. The triumphant smirk on my mother's face instantly evaporated, replaced by genuine shock. Adeline, what are you doing? I told you to sign those papers. I placed the silver pen back into its holder with a sharp, decisive click. I am not signing away a single square foot of my empire, Mother. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Beatrice took a step forward, her face flushing with a renewed explosive rage. How dare you? You selfish, ungrateful child. I demand you sign this transfer immediately. I walked around the edge of the frosted glass desk, closing the distance between us, until I was standing mere inches from her. I was taller, colder, and infinitely more powerful in this room. You do not demand anything in my building. I whispered, my voice a lethal blade slicing through the frozen air of the suite. You walked into my sanctuary and attempted to use my greatest personal heartbreak as leverage to steal my corporate assets. You told me I have no real family to pass my wealth down to. You are absolutely right. I have no family. I have parasites. And I am done feeding them. Beatrice opened her mouth to scream, to launch into another tirade of emotional abuse, but I cut her off completely. Sarah, escort Beatrice out of the building. If she resists, call building security and have her physically removed for trespassing. Beatrice gasped, taking a stumbling step backward as if she had been physically struck. You cannot do this to me. I am your mother. I looked at her with eyes as dead and dark as the ocean floor. You stopped being my mother the moment you decided my worth was determined by my utility to Chloe. Go back to your golden child, Beatrice. Tell her she will not be getting her luxury spa in Buckhead. Tell her to enjoy the life she has right now. Because very soon, everything is going to change. Sarah moved forward with clinical efficiency, gesturing toward the open doors. This way, please. Beatrice stared at me, her chest heaving with indignation and a sudden creeping terror. She finally realized that the dutiful, compliant daughter was gone, replaced by a ruthless corporate predator who owed her absolutely nothing. She snatched her designer bag off my desk and stormed out of the office, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. Sarah followed closely, pulling the heavy oak doors shut and sealing me back inside my silent domain. I stood alone in the center of the room. The air was still freezing. The trap was fully primed. My mother had just delivered the final confirmation I needed. There would be no mercy, no hesitation. I walked back to my desk and placed my hand flat against the cold glass. The slaughter was officially scheduled. But a slaughter requires the livestock to remain docile, blissfully grazing until the absolute moment the blade drops. I had let my sheer disgust override my tactical discipline. If Beatrice left this building believing I had suddenly grown a spine of steel, she would immediately call Julian to complain. Julian would complain to Marcus. Panic would set in. They might check their offshore safety nets before the federal authorities fully locked the New Horizon accounts on Tuesday. I could not risk them discovering the trap prematurely. I pressed my finger against the intercom. Sarah, halt security. Keep my mother at the reception desk. Tell her I'm coming out. I remained standing behind my desk. The camera of my own mind seemed to execute a slow, deliberate push toward my reflection in the dark glass window. A memory surfaced, violent and unbidden, rising from the deepest, most agonizing vault of my past. It was not a memory of financial ruin, but of a sterile, brightly lit fertility clinic 5 years ago. I recalled the sharp chemical scent of antiseptic and the cold shock of ultrasound gel. I remembered the agonizingly precise schedule of synthetic hormone injections that wrecked my emotional stability and left my stomach a canvas of purple and yellow bruises. I remembered sitting on the edge of the examination table, clutching a paper gown around myself, sobbing until I could barely breathe after yet another negative pregnancy test, utterly convinced my body was a barren wasteland. And I remembered Marcus. He would kneel beside me, his face a perfect tragic mask of devoted sympathy. He would pull me into his arms, kissing the top of my head as I wept against his shoulder. "It is not your fault, Adeline," he would whisper, his voice thick with manufactured grief. "Some bodies just are not meant to bear children. We will find another way to be a family. I love you no matter what your physical flaws are." He would wipe my tears and tell me not to hate myself, playing the role of the endlessly supportive husband, carrying the burden of an inadequate wife. The absolute staggering sadism of those moments had only become clear 3 nights ago. While David was auditing our deep financial history to trace the origins of the New Horizon LLC funds his algorithms had snagged on a heavily redacted medical invoice routed through a phantom health savings account, Marcus thought he had successfully purged. It was dated 6 years ago, a full year before Marcus and I had even started our grueling, agonizing fertility treatments. It was a surgical bill for a bilateral vasectomy performed by a discreet private surgeon in Miami. Marcus had permanently severed his own reproductive capabilities before we ever set foot in a clinic. He had deliberately watched me subject my body to endless painful chemical treatments. He had watched me drown in self-loathing and biological shame, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on specialists. He had held my hand and blamed my anatomy, knowing with absolute clinical certainty that it was physically impossible for him to father a child with me. He had orchestrated my infertility trauma solely to ensure he would never be permanently tethered to me by blood, reserving his actual fatherhood for his precious Chloe. A single hot tear broke free and rolled down my cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of pure, concentrated, lethal hatred. But to the untrained eye, it looked exactly like the broken spirit of a barren, deeply inadequate woman. I reached up and wiped the moisture away, leaving my eyes red and shining. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing, the rigid, perfect posture of the untouchable executive. I allowed the heavy, crushing weight of my fake inferiority to physically alter my stance. The predator vanished entirely. The pathetic, dutiful, infertile daughter took her place. It was a masterpiece of spontaneous survivalist acting. I opened the heavy oak doors and walked down the long corridor toward the executive reception area. Beatrice was standing near the elevator banks, arguing fiercely with two of my security guards, her designer bag clutched against her chest like a shield. She turned her head as I approached, her eyes blazing with indignation, ready to unleash a torrent of verbal abuse for being dismissed. I did not give her the chance. I stopped a few feet away, letting my breathing hitch visibly. My hands trembled as I reached out toward her. "Mother, wait," I said, my voice cracking, fragile and thick with unshed tears. "Please." Beatrice paused, her tirade dying in her throat. Her sharp, assessing eyes scanned my face, registering the redness in my eyes, the slump of my shoulders, the sheer pathetic desperation radiating from my performance. This was the Adeline she recognized, the Adeline she could control. "I am sorry," I whispered, letting a quiet, broken sob slip past my lips. I covered my mouth with my hand, looking down at the polished marble floor as if I could not bear to meet her gaze. "I am so sorry, Mother. You caught me off guard. The stress of this firm, the pressure of the market." I lost my mind for a moment. Beatrice gestured for the security guards to back away. They looked at me for confirmation, and I gave them a subtle, dismissive nod. Once we were alone in the vast reception lobby, my mother stepped closer. Her posture instantly shifted from defensive outrage to a smug, toxic triumph. Beatrice did not just accept my apology, she inhaled it. It was oxygen to her. You were incredibly disrespectful, Adeline, she scolded, though her tone was already softening with the deep satisfaction of my sudden submission. I am your mother. You do not banish me from a room like one of your disposable employees. I know, I cried softly, letting genuine tears of rage fall perfectly disguised as tears of deep, shameful remorse. It is just what you said in there about me taking my assets to the grave. About my infertility. It hurts so much. I forced myself to look up at her, my expression the very picture of a wounded, desperate child begging for maternal validation. You know how much I hate my own body for failing Marcus. I confessed, pouring every ounce of fake vulnerability into my words. You know how much guilt I carry because I can never give him a real family like Chloe is giving Julian. Hearing you say it out loud, hearing you remind me of how broken I am, it just shattered me. I felt so unbelievably inadequate. Beatrice sighed, a long theatrical sound of long-suffering patience. She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture entirely devoid of actual warmth, but incredibly heavy with condescension. She fed on my perceived weakness like a vampire. This was her natural element, managing the emotional wreckage of the daughter she deemed inferior. Adeline, darling, we all have our burdens in this life, Beatrice murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Your sister has the immense burden of raising the next generation of our family legacy. Your burden is simply to facilitate that. You are not a mother, but you are an excellent financial provider. We all must play the roles we were assigned. You cannot fight your nature. You are right, I choked out, nodding frantically. You have always been right. Chloe deserves that commercial space in Buckhead. She needs a sanctuary away from the stress of the new baby. I have been so terribly selfish, hoarding property I do not even use while she is sacrificing her body and her youth for her marriage. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a sheer silk handkerchief, dabbing carefully at my eyes. I made sure to let my hand shake just enough to convey total psychological surrender. I overreacted because I was jealous, mother, I whispered, staring at the floor. I am just so unspeakably jealous of her perfect life. Beatrice smiled. It was a terrifying, genuine smile of absolute victory. Her golden child was safe, and her scapegoat was back in her rightful place, groveling for crumbs of approval. Jealousy is an ugly, destructive trait, Adeline, but at least you are finally admitting it, she said, adjusting the strap of her handbag with a renewed sense of arrogant authority. Acceptance is the first step toward grace. Now about the transfer documents for the Buckhead property. I will sign them, I said immediately, my voice desperate to please her. I left them on my desk. But I cannot execute them right this second. The legal team has to process the deed transition through Vanguard Holdings, and it requires a mandatory 48-hour holding period for intracompany transfers to clear the corporate tax codes. If I sign them today, it will trigger an automatic federal audit flag on both of our accounts. I spouted the technical jargon, smoothly wrapping a blatant lie in indisputable corporate truth. I needed to delay her just long enough for the weekend to pass. Leave the documents with me, I pleaded softly, looking at her with wide, wet eyes. I will have my private notary finalize the signatures first thing Monday morning. I will personally deliver the keys and the deed to Chloe's house by Tuesday afternoon. I promise, Mother. I will make this right. I will give her exactly what she deserves. Beatrice studied me for a long, silent moment. She weighed my tears, my slumped posture, and my absolute verbal submission. To her, I was completely broken back under her heel where I belonged. The illusion was entirely flawless. Very well, Beatrice agreed, her tone magnanimous. Tuesday afternoon. Do not disappoint me again, Adeline. Chloe is very fragile right now, and she needs this spa to focus her energy. I am glad you have finally seen reason. I have, I whispered, forcing a watery, pathetic smile. Thank you for not giving up on me, Mother. She offered me one last condescending pat on the cheek before turning on her heel. I watched her walk toward the elevators, her stride confident and victorious. The elevator doors opened, she stepped inside without looking back, and the heavy steel doors slid shut, sealing her fate along with the rest of them. The moment the digital floor indicator began to descend, my tears stopped instantly. The fragile, shaking woman vanished into the ether. My spine snapped straight, my shoulders squared, and the lethal, unyielding predator resumed total control. I took a deep, steadying breath, wiping the remaining moisture from my face with the back of my hand. I had bought myself the weekend. 72 hours of uninterrupted, beautiful silence. 72 hours where Marcus would blissfully furnish his stolen villa, Julian would desperately try to ignore his bleeding company, and Beatrice would eagerly plan her favorite daughter's new luxury business. They would spend the next 3 days floating on a cloud of absolute arrogance, completely unaware that the atmosphere was quickly running out of oxygen. I turned and walked back toward the heavy oak doors of my executive suite. I had promised my mother that I would give Chloe exactly what she deserved by Tuesday afternoon. And I was a woman who always, without fail, kept my promises. Tuesday afternoon arrived, draped in a suffocating slate-gray storm. Rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, distorting the Atlanta skyline into a blurred, watery painting. Inside the executive suite, the temperature remained fixed at a sterile, chilling absolute zero. I sat behind my desk, my hands folded neatly over a pristine stack of legal documents. I had spent the weekend refining this particular snare, consulting with David and my senior legal counsel to ensure the wording was dense, impenetrable, and absolutely binding. The heavy oak doors swung open precisely at 2 o'clock. Beatrice marched in shaking droplets of rain from her designer umbrella before handing it off to Sarah with a dismissive wave. My mother looked entirely refreshed, glowing with the toxic vitality of a woman who believed she had successfully dominated her environment. She wore a tailored crimson suit projecting power, authority, and an unshakable sense of entitlement. She strode across the Persian rug and took a seat in the leather guest chair opposite my desk, crossing her legs and looking at me with a distinctly expectant smirk. She expected to see the broken, weeping daughter from Friday afternoon. I was more than happy to oblige her delusion. I let my shoulders slump by a fraction of an inch. I kept my gaze lowered intentionally, avoiding direct eye contact. I arranged my features into a mask of exhausted resignation, the perfect portrait of a woman who had fought a losing battle and had finally decided to surrender to the inevitable. "I have everything prepared, Mother," I said, my voice quiet, lacking its usual sharp, commanding resonance. I had my team work through the weekend to process the asset allocation. Beatrice smiled, a slow, deeply satisfied curving of her lips. She leaned back in the chair, absorbing my defeated posture like a sponge soaking up water. "I knew you would eventually come to your senses, Adeline. It is completely unnatural to harbor such bitter jealousy toward your own sister. Chloe needs this spa. It will give her a sense of purpose, a little project to keep her occupied while Julian manages his company. It is the least you can do considering your own limitations." Her casual cruelty did not even register on my emotional radar anymore. She was a predictable machine operating exactly as I had programmed her to. I pushed a thick, bound portfolio across the frosted glass surface of the desk. The blue signature tabs jutted out from the edges, marking the exact locations where she would sign her life away. "The commercial property in Buckhead is fully cleared for transfer," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly subdued. "I am transferring the deed from Vanguard Holdings directly into a new corporate entity registered under Chloe's name. She will have absolute operational control over the building." Beatrice reached out and patted my hand, a gesture so patronizing it made my skin crawl. "Good girl. You see how easy things are when you stop fighting your role in this family. Give me the pen. I want to take the transfer confirmation straight to Chloe's house today. She has already started picking out paint swatches for the lobby." I did not hand her the pen. Instead, I let out a long, heavy sigh, pulling my hand away from her touch and rubbing my temples as if fighting off a massive migraine. "There is one minor procedural hurdle," I murmured, sounding terribly apologetic. "A compliance issue with the board of directors." Beatrice stiffened, her eyes narrowing instantly. Her hand hovered over the portfolio. "What do you mean, a compliance issue? I thought you said you owned this property. You are the CEO of this firm. You answer to no one. Tell your board to back down." I own the majority stake, Mother, but Vanguard Holdings is a heavily regulated corporate entity. We cannot simply gift a prime multi-million-dollar commercial asset to a brand new LLC with zero operational history, zero liquid capital, and zero credit rating. It violates every federal underwriting law in the book. If I push this transfer through without securing the operational capital, the Federal Banking Commission will audit my entire firm for corporate embezzlement. Beatrice scoffed, waving her hand dismissively at my explanation. She hated details. She despised any bureaucratic obstacle that stood between her and her desires. Then figure it out, Adeline. Put some cash into Chloe's new company. Give her a startup fund. You have millions sitting in accounts doing absolutely nothing. I looked down at the desk, biting my inner cheek to suppress a cold, predatory smile. I cannot do that legally. I lied smoothly, layering my voice with fake anxiety. I cannot personally fund a company that is receiving an asset from my own subsidiary. It is a direct conflict of fiduciary interest. It constitutes insider dealing. The board will block the transfer and Chloe will lose the building before she even gets the keys. Beatrice slammed her hand flat against the glass desk. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. Then what is the solution, Adeline? I promised your sister this property. I will not go back there and tell her that your incompetent lawyers cannot figure out a simple real estate transfer. I looked up at her, my eyes wide and perfectly innocent. There is a very simple solution, I said softly. Vanguard Holdings is perfectly willing to issue a direct commercial line of credit to Chloe's new LLC. A $5 million business loan to cover the property, transfer the interior renovations, the high-end spa equipment, and her first 2 years of staffing payroll. We can fund her entire dream right now. Beatrice's expression softened slightly. A $5 million loan. That sounds perfectly reasonable. Issue the loan. They will issue the loan today. I continued, my voice steady, guiding her directly into the center of the slaughterhouse. But because Chloe has no personal collateral, no income, and no financial standing independent of Julian Vanguard, requires a guarantor. Someone to legally back the line of credit. Someone with substantial verifiable assets to secure the debt in the highly unlikely event that her luxury spa fails to turn a profit. I pushed a separate single sheet of paper across the desk. It was the cross-collateralization agreement. I cannot sign as her guarantor, I explained, looking at my mother with manufactured helplessness. Because I own the lending firm, it would trigger a federal fraud investigation. But you can sign it, Mother. You have the historic family estate in Savannah. It is fully paid off, held in a private trust, and easily valued at over $8 million. If you sign this cross-collateralization agreement, you act as Chloe's credit sponsor. You guarantee her business loan using the family estate as the underlying security. The board will approve the transfer immediately and Chloe gets her building today. Beatrice stared at the document. For a fraction of a second, I wondered if her self-preservation instincts would kick in. I wondered if she would actually read the dense legal text detailing exactly how quickly Vanguard Holdings could seize her ancestral home if the loan defaulted. I wondered if she would realize that she was literally betting the roof over her head on a daughter who had never worked a single day in her life. But I knew my mother. I knew the fatal, blinding depths of her hubris. Beatrice looked at the paper, and then she laughed. It was a sharp, arrogant sound that filled the room. She was entirely insulted by the mere suggestion of risk. You corporate drones are all the same, she sneered, reaching into her bag and pulling out her own gold-plated fountain pen. You are obsessed with worst-case scenarios. Chloe is brilliant. She has Julian's business connections and my absolute support. Her spa is going to be the most exclusive wellness center in Buckhead. The idea that she would default on a petty $5 million loan is laughable. She did not read the first paragraph. She did not ask a single question about the interest rates, the repayment schedule, or the catastrophic default clauses I had personally buried in the fine print. Her unyielding favoritism, her desperate need to spoil her golden child, and her absolute conviction that she was smarter than the rigid corporate system blinded her to the reality of the transaction. She believed she was indulging a bureaucratic formality to get what she wanted. Beatrice uncapped her pen. I watched her hand move toward the signature line. The camera of my mind pushed in slowly, framing the exact moment her gold nib touched the crisp white paper. The ink flowed smooth and black. I watched the looping, elegant cursive of her first name. I watched the sharp, aggressive cross of the T in her last name. She was signing a death warrant. By legally binding her historic Savannah estate as collateral for a loan issued by my private company, she had just handed me the deed to her entire aristocratic legacy. When I utterly dismantled Julian and Marcus, the financial shockwave would instantly bankrupt Chloe. Chloe would default on the spa loan on the very first payment. And the second that loan went into default, Vanguard Holdings would execute the cross-collateralization clause. I would legally seize my mother's beloved estate, evict her from the property, and liquidate the house she cherished above all human life. There, Beatrice said, tossing the signed document back across the desk with an air of immense superiority. The bureaucracy is satisfied. Your sister gets her building, and you get to keep your job. Everybody wins. She capped her pen and dropped it back into her purse. Now give me the keys, Adeline. I have a celebration to attend. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a heavy set of polished commercial keys attached to a silver ring. I placed them on the glass surface and slid them toward her. They were the actual keys to the Buckhead property. Let her have them. Let Chloe order the custom massage tables. Let them hire the staff. The higher they built the tower, the more devastating the impact would be when I demolished the foundation. Beatrice snatched the keys off the desk, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She stood up, smoothing the front of her crimson suit. Try to be a little less miserable, Adeline, she threw over her shoulder as she walked toward the heavy oak doors. If you focused half as much energy on keeping your husband happy as you do on these tedious financial games, perhaps you would not be so hopelessly alone. She did not wait for a response. She pulled the doors open and marched out into the reception area, the sharp click of her heels fading down the corridor as she left to deliver her stolen prize. I remained seated at my desk. The silence rushed back into the room, cold and absolute. I reached out and pulled the cross-collateralization agreement toward me. I stared at the signature for a long time, tracing the black ink with my eyes. The facade was over. The acting was finished. I did not have to pretend to be small or broken or defeated for another second. I picked up the heavy leather portfolio containing Julian's consolidated corporate debt. I placed my mother's newly signed property death warrant directly on top of it. I gathered the frozen account files for Marcus's offshore shell company and added them to the pile. I had successfully isolated, trapped, and legally bound every single one of them. I closed the thick cover of the master file. My eyes were entirely dry, fixed on the rain washing over the city skyline. The paperwork was immaculate. The evidence was irrefutable. Every legal mechanism was armed, loaded, and pointed directly at their heads. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a slow, quiet breath into the freezing room. All that remained was the night of judgment. The night of judgment arrived, bathed in the golden, suffocating glow of a dozen massive crystal chandeliers. I pushed through the heavy mahogany double doors of the Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom, stepping directly into the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. The air was heavy with the scent of white lilies, expensive French perfumes, and the intoxicating metallic tang of unearned arrogance. It was exactly the kind of grotesque, lavish spectacle my mother lived for. Beatrice had successfully managed to twist a sacred religious sacrament into a high-profile corporate networking gala. The embossed, gold-leafed invitations had announced the baptism of Chloe's newborn child, but the sprawling 200-person guest list consisted entirely of venture capitalists, local politicians, and real estate magnates. There was no quiet family intimacy to be found here. It was a trade show masquerading as a family milestone designed explicitly to parade Chloe's supposed perfection and Julian's fabricated success in front of the city's financial elite. I moved through the crowd with measured, deliberate steps. I wore a tailored evening gown of liquid obsidian silk, the dark fabric flowing like deep water around my ankles. The silhouette was severe, engineered with sharp, asymmetrical shoulders and a high-structured collar that projected absolute, untouchable authority. My hair was pulled back into a flawless, severe twist, leaving my face entirely exposed. I wore no jewelry save for a single heavy diamond ring on my right hand. I did not need accessories. I was wearing my power. If a cinematographer were capturing this exact second, the lens would be locked in a steady, unbroken tracking shot right behind my shoulders, following my slow, relentless march straight into the center of the hunting ground. I was the apex predator stepping onto a brightly lit stage surrounded by docile prey, completely unaware that the gates of the slaughterhouse had already been locked behind them. Conversations buzzed around me, a cacophony of wealth and privilege. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved seamlessly through the throngs of people carrying silver trays loaded with flutes of vintage champagne and caviar canapes. I did not accept a glass. My mind was too sharp, my focus too absolute to tolerate even a drop of alcohol. I kept my eyes fixed forward, scanning the terrain and taking inventory of the condemned. My gaze caught Julian first. He was stationed near a massive, intricately carved ice sculpture of an angel holding court with a circle of prominent angel investors and domestic hedge fund managers. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket that he absolutely could not afford, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch with an air of practiced, arrogant ease. I drifted closer, allowing the natural flow of the crowd to mask my approach, letting his loud, boastful voice wash over me. "We are disrupting the entire domestic supply chain," Julian was saying, gesturing expansively with his free hand. "The beta testing for our logistics algorithm has shown exponential quarter-over-quarter growth. We are practically turning away Tier 1 investors at this point. The Series B funding round is going to be incredibly exclusive, but I always prefer to keep my local Atlanta partners in the loop." It was a pathetic, transparent performance. He was standing in a ballroom funded entirely by his mother-in-law, wearing clothes bought on credit, desperately trying to secure cash injections to plug the massive bleeding holes in his hollow company. I watched the slight nervous sheen of sweat on his forehead. I noticed the way his eyes darted frantically around the circle, begging for validation from the older, wealthier men. He was a drowning man trying to sell water. He had absolutely no idea that his private lenders had panicked and sold his entire portfolio of toxic debt to me over the weekend. He did not know that the very company he was currently bragging about legally belonged to me, and that I held the unilateral power to liquidate his assets before the caterers even cleared the dessert plates. I glided past his circle, offering him a brief, chilling smile. Julian caught my eye, his boastful smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he raised his scotch glass to me in a mock salute. I did not break my stride. My attention shifted to the far end of the ballroom where the true spectacle was taking place. A grand, elevated dais had been constructed against the back wall, framed by a massive, breathtaking arch of white roses and orchids. It was a literal pedestal built for the sole purpose of elevating my family above the guests. Beatrice stood at the edge of the stage wearing a champagne-colored gown dripping in genuine pearls. She was practically vibrating with toxic triumph, holding a microphone and preparing to address the room. She was the architect of this grand illusion, the puppet master pulling the strings of a perfectly curated aristocratic family. She believed she had successfully bullied me into financing Chloe's luxury spa. She believed her historic Savannah estate was perfectly secure. She was completely blind to the cross-collateralization snare currently resting in my corporate vault. But it was the sight of Marcus and Chloe that truly solidified the ice in my veins. Chloe sat in a plush velvet armchair in the center of the stage. She wore a pristine, flowing white gown, presenting herself as the absolute picture of maternal grace and purity. She cradled the sleeping infant in her arms, looking out over the crowd with a soft, martyred smile. She was playing the exhausted but deeply blessed mother, soaking up the admiring glances of the Atlanta elite. And standing directly behind her chair, resting his hand casually on the velvet upholstery, was my husband. Marcus wore a bespoke charcoal suit, looking every inch the handsome, devoted, wealthy family man. To the 200 guests in the room, he was the supportive uncle, the proud brother-in-law, celebrating the continuation of his wife's family line. But to me, the micro-expressions were glaringly obvious. I watched the way Marcus shifted his weight, leaning down to whisper something into Chloe's ear. I watched Chloe tilt her head back, offering him a secret, intimate smile that went entirely unnoticed by the surrounding crowd. I watched Marcus's hand slip down from the back of the chair, his fingers brushing against Chloe's bare shoulder for a second too long. It was a sickening, brazen display of their hidden reality. They were standing on a brilliantly lit stage surrounded by hundreds of people, silently communicating their shared betrayal. Marcus was looking at the infant in Chloe's arms, not with the distant affection of an uncle, but with the quiet, possessive pride of a father. He was looking at the child he had deliberately, maliciously denied me by secretly severing his own reproductive capabilities years ago. He had subjected me to agonizing fertility treatments, watched me drown in biological shame, and lied to my face every single day, all to reserve his legacy for my younger sister. They thought they were untouchable. They believed their secret was safely buried beneath layers of deception, protected by my supposed ignorance and my desperate need for their love. They looked out at the glittering ballroom and saw a kingdom they had successfully conquered. I stopped at the edge of the dance floor, standing perfectly still as the ambient noise of the gala washed around me. The music swelled a bright classical string arrangement that felt entirely inappropriate for the execution I was about to perform. I looked up at the stage, meeting Marcus's eyes across the vast expanse of the room. He offered me a warm, loving smile, raising his glass in my direction. He was playing the perfect husband to the very last second. I did not smile back. I simply stared at him, my expression entirely blank, a void of emotion that seemed to finally cause a ripple of unease to pass over his handsome features. His smile faltered. His hand dropped away from Chloe's chair. The documents were verified. The trap was sprung. The audience was seated, and the actors were in their final positions. I took one last deep breath, feeling the absolute terrifying power of the truth burning in my chest. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time to tear down the stage and let the entire world watch them burn. I walked straight through the center of the ballroom. The sea of tailored suits and silk gowns parted for me instinctively. The chatter died down as I ascended the short flight of velvet stairs to the grand dais. Beatrice beamed at me, her chest puffing out with pride, fully believing her compliant, infertile daughter had arrived to publicly grovel and offer the family's newest addition a massive financial blessing. Chloe shifted in her armchair, adjusting the sleeping infant to ensure the photographers caught her best angle. Marcus stepped aside, offering me the microphone with that same perfectly manufactured, loving smile. I took the cold metal microphone from his hand. I turned to face the 200 guests. The room fell into absolute silence. The Atlanta elite waited with bated breath for my customary generous display of familial devotion. I reached into the pocket of my obsidian silk gown and produced a small black remote. I aimed it directly at the AV booth tucked away in the balcony. I clicked the button. The massive digital screens flanking the floral arch behind us instantly shifted. The rotating gallery of professional newborn portraits vanished. In their place, blazing in stark high-definition contrast, was a certified medical document. It was a DNA paternity test, blown up to 10 feet tall, so that every single venture capitalist, politician, and socialite in the room could read the unmistakable bold red lettering at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity 99.9%. Subject A, Marcus Sterling. Subject B, the infant currently resting in my sister's arms. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the grand ballroom. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with the electric shock of pure scandal. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, cold and sharp as cracked ice. The $1 million trust fund I had previously established for my sister's child is hereby officially canceled, I announced, ensuring my diction was crystal clear. The trust contained a very specific morality clause which has obviously been violated. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with my husband. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said, my voice ringing out over the paralyzed crowd. "You finally have the heir you always wanted. But unfortunately, your celebration ends here. You are officially fired from your executive position at my firm, effective immediately. Furthermore, I have personally frozen every single one of your corporate and personal credit cards. You are entirely cut off." Marcus stared at me. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed, leaving his skin the hue of wet ash. His hand began to tremble violently. The crystal tumbler of scotch slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the polished wooden floor of the stage, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces, the amber liquid pooling around his expensive leather shoes. He opened his mouth desperately, trying to form words, trying to deploy the charming manipulative lies that had worked for over a decade, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was paralyzed, publicly executed in front of the exact high society network he had spent his entire life trying to impress. The sound of breaking crystal broke the spell holding the room hostage. A collective murmur swelled into a tidal wave of panicked whispers. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus, but my peripheral vision caught the exact moment the truth detonated in Julian's brain. He had been standing near the ice sculpture, practically vibrating with unearned confidence just minutes ago. Now he stared at the massive digital projection, his eyes tracing the red letters over and over, until the reality of his profound humiliation set in. The baby his wife was holding was not his. He was the ultimate fool paraded in front of his supposed peers. His face mottled into a furious, bruised purple. A guttural, animalistic roar ripped from his throat. He dropped his glass, indifferent to the splash of amber liquid on the tuxedo he could not afford, and lunged across the stage directly at Marcus, his hands curled into fists aiming for the face of the man who had stolen his legacy. He did not even make it 2 steps. David and my elite security detail materialized from the shadows of the ballroom with terrifying efficiency. Before Julian could close the distance, 2 massive men in tailored black suits intercepted him. They slammed him down against the polished wood of the stage, pinning his arms behind his back with practiced, unbreakable force. Julian thrashed wildly, his face pressed against the floorboards, spitting curses and screaming incoherently at Marcus. I did not flinch. I did not move a single inch. I simply turned on my heel and stepped toward the struggling, pathetic man on the floor. I lowered the microphone, aiming it directly at him. "Do not pretend to have any moral high ground here, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through his frantic shouting like a surgical blade. "Do not attempt to play the wounded, righteous patriarch. You lost the right to act superior the moment you decided my race and my gender made me an easy target for your endless, arrogant mockery." Julian froze, his chest heaving as he stared up at me from the floor. "You have spent years treating me with thinly veiled contempt." I continued, pacing slowly around him. "You paraded around my city, drinking my champagne and sneering at the very woman funding your entire existence. You genuinely believed your skin color and your fraudulent pedigree made you untouchable. Let me welcome you to reality." I signaled to the audio booth again. The DNA test vanished, instantly replaced by a stark, undeniable financial dossier. It was the consolidated record of Julian's venture capital firm. "Your logistics company is a catastrophic failure," I announced to the captivated, silent ballroom. "You have been insolvent for 6 months. You spent the entire weekend desperately begging private lenders for a bridge loan. What they did not tell you is that I bought out your entire portfolio of toxic debt at 6 o'clock this morning. I paid absolute pennies on the dollar." Julian's eyes widened in sheer terror. The fight drained out of his body instantly. "You do not have a company anymore, Julian," I stated, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I own every single asset, every patent, and every piece of intellectual property your firm ever touched. You are officially, irreversibly bankrupt." I stepped closer, looking down at his customized velvet tuxedo jacket. "The designer clothes on your back, the vintage scotch you were just drinking, the luxury cars parked in your driveway, all of it exists solely because of my money. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. Everything you thought made you an elite member of society was paid for by the exact same black woman you spent years trying to diminish." Julian stopped struggling against the guards. His shoulders slumped, and a hollow, vacant stare washed over his face. The aggressive, arrogant white savior of the tech world evaporated, leaving behind a broken, penniless fraud. He sagged against the floorboards, his entire high society facade stripped away, exposing the pathetic empty shell beneath. The ballroom remained deathly quiet, every investor and magnate watching the total annihilation of a man who had dared to bite the hand that fed him. The silence hanging over the grand ballroom shattered with a piercing, hysterical shriek. Beatrice lunged forward, her champagne-colored silk gown tangling around her legs as she scrambled up the velvet stairs of the dais. The mask of the poised, aristocratic matriarch had completely melted away, replaced by the contorted, feral visage of a woman watching her meticulously crafted universe disintegrate. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. "You are a demon!" she screamed, her voice cracking and echoing through the massive speakers. "You are a vile, jealous monster. You have intentionally destroyed the honor of this family. You are humiliating your own blood in front of the entire city." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years making me feel utterly invisible, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. "I did not destroy the honor of this family, Mother," I replied, my voice projecting with terrifying calm across the vast room. There was no honor left to destroy. I simply turned on the lights and let the world see the rot you have been desperately hiding. I reached to the frosted glass podium beside me and picked up the thick, heavy leather portfolio I had brought with me. It contained the culmination of my weekend of legal maneuvering. I held it up for a fraction of a second, letting the stage lights catch the embossed gold lettering of my corporate firm before I threw it violently onto the floor at Beatrice's feet. The heavy binder hit the polished wood with a loud, resounding thud. "No, Mother, you ruined yourself," I stated, looking down at her. "You thought you were outsmarting the system yesterday afternoon in my office. You thought you were indulging Chloe while mocking my supposed bureaucratic incompetence. But you never read the fine print." Beatrice stared at the portfolio on the ground, her breathing shallow, a new creeping horror beginning to dawn in her eyes. "That massive, sprawling mansion Marcus supposedly purchased for Chloe last year was not bought with cash," I explained, making sure every venture capitalist in the audience could hear the mechanics of their ruin. It was heavily financed through a series of shadow loans that were quietly acquired by my subsidiary last month. Marcus has been using fraudulent offshore accounts to cover the mortgage, funneling money away from his own legitimate business ventures to fund Chloe's delusion of grandeur. Now that Marcus is officially fired, his accounts frozen, and his assets locked in an embezzlement investigation, that mortgage is in immediate catastrophic default. Chloe let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, clutching the baby closer to her chest as she shrank back into her velvet armchair. Marcus remained frozen, his face entirely bloodless, incapable of defending her. "My subsidiary executed the foreclosure protocols exactly 20 minutes ago." I continued, my gaze locking onto Beatrice like a laser. "The Buckhead mansion has been legally seized. And because your precious golden child Chloe has zero verifiable income, zero personal capital, and absolutely no ability to pay a fraction of the remaining debt, the cross-collateralization clause you signed yesterday has been fully activated." Beatrice swayed on her feet, the color drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a chalky mask. She shook her head in slow, desperate denial, refusing to process the words. "You guaranteed her debt, Mother," I said softly, driving the final nail directly into her heart. "You offered up your beloved historic Savannah estate as the underlying security. The paperwork is filed. The deed has been transferred. Your house is officially the property of Vanguard Holdings. The local authorities and the banking commission will be at your gates at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to seal the doors and board up the windows. You are completely and utterly homeless." "No," Beatrice gasped, her voice dropping to a hoarse, ragged whisper. "No, you cannot do this. That house is my legacy. It belongs to our family." "It belonged to you," I corrected her. "Now it belongs to me." The realization hit Beatrice with the force of a physical blow. Her mind, unable to process the total annihilation of her wealth and status, violently snapped. She turned away from me, her eyes wild, and locked onto the only person she could blame. "You useless, miserable parasite," Beatrice shrieked, launching herself at Chloe. Beatrice grabbed a fistful of Chloe's pristine white gown, yanking her forward with shocking, unhinged strength. Chloe screamed in terror, handing the crying infant to a stunned nanny who had rushed to the edge of the stage. Beatrice slapped her golden child across the face, the sharp crack of flesh against flesh echoing through the ballroom. "You lost my house. You let that pathetic failure of a man drag us into the gutter." "Mom, stop," Chloe sobbed, trying to shield her face as her mother clawed at her hair, tearing out the expensive diamond pins. "It was not my fault. Marcus promised me everything was fine." Marcus snapped out of his paralyzed daze. He lunged forward to pull Beatrice off his mistress, grabbing his mother-in-law by the shoulders. Beatrice fought back like a rabid animal, digging her manicured nails deep into Marcus's cheek and drawing a thick line of blood down his face. But the chaos had only just begun. Julian, who had been pinned to the floorboards by my security team, saw Marcus distracted. With a sudden adrenaline-fueled surge of pure, humiliated rage, Julian wrenched his arm free from the guard. He scrambled to his feet, his tuxedo jacket torn his face purple with unbridled fury. He charged across the stage and tackled Marcus from behind. "You stole my life!" Julian roared, driving his fist directly into the center of Marcus's face. "You stole my wife! You stole my child! You arrogant, lying bastard!" Both men crashed onto the polished floor, taking a pedestal of white orchids down with them. The flowers scattered across the stage, crushed beneath their expensive leather shoes. It was a brutal, undignified brawl. Marcus threw a desperate punch, catching Julian in the jaw, but Julian retaliated by grabbing Marcus by his tailored collar and slamming his head against the wooden floorboards. Chloe was screaming hysterically, crawling backward on her hands and knees to escape the violence, while Beatrice continued to hurl vile, profanity-laced insults at all of them, demanding her mansion back. I took 2 steps back, completely removing myself from the carnage. I looked out at the 200 guests, the elite venture capitalists, the polished politicians, the untouchable billionaires of Atlanta. Not a single person stepped forward to intervene. Not a single person called for help. Instead, a sea of glowing rectangular screens illuminated the dim ballroom. Every single guest had their smartphone raised high in the air. The flashbulbs strobed like a relentless lightning storm. They were recording every slap, every punch, every pathetic screaming accusation. The Sterling Vanguard family, once the absolute pinnacle of high society, was currently rolling around in broken glass and crushed orchids, tearing each other apart for the entertainment of the internet. Tomorrow morning, this footage would be on the front page of every financial blog and gossip column in the country. Their social annihilation was complete. Their professional reputations were obliterated. There was no coming back from this specific, highly documented brand of disgrace. I stood at the edge of the stage, my obsidian silk gown untouched by the blood, sweat, and tears staining the floorboards. I watched them destroy the last remaining shreds of their dignity. The air in the ballroom no longer smelled like lilies and perfume. It smelled like raw, unfiltered panic. I did not offer them a second glance. I turned my back on the screaming, writhing pile of my former family, stepped calmly down the velvet stairs, and walked out the grand mahogany doors, leaving them to rot in the ruins they had built for themselves. The screaming, the crashing of furniture, and the frantic flashing of smartphone cameras suddenly faded into a dull, muted hum. The audio of the ballroom seemed to drop out completely in my own mind, leaving behind a vacuum of absolute, pristine silence. Before I could take another step toward the exit, a bloody hand clamped desperately onto the hem of my obsidian silk gown. I paused, looking down. Marcus had dragged himself out of the melee, falling heavily to his knees at my feet. Blood dripped from the deep scratches on his cheek, staining the collar of his bespoke suit. "Adeline, please." He choked out, his voice pathetic and breaking, staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You have to stop this. It was a mistake. She manipulated me. Chloe threw herself at me. She set this entire thing up. You have to believe me." He was a grown man, weeping on the floor, instantly sacrificing the woman he supposedly loved just to save his own skin. A few feet away, Chloe dragged herself across the scattered orchids, clutching the screaming infant to her chest. Her pristine white gown was ruined, trampled and torn. "Adeline, have mercy," she sobbed, her face contorted in ugly, desperate panic. "For the baby. He is your nephew. You cannot leave us with absolutely nothing. Please, I am begging you." At the edge of the stage, Beatrice had collapsed. Her pearl necklace had snapped during the brawl, the expensive beads rolling away across the marble stairs. She looked up at me with hollow, terrified eyes, the commanding matriarch entirely broken. "Adeline, my home," she whimpered, her hands shaking as she reached out toward the empty air. "Please, do not take my house." I looked down at the three of them, the architects of my misery now groveling in the dust of their destroyed empire. I did not speak a single word. I did not offer them the satisfaction of my anger, my pity, or my sorrow. They deserved nothing but the cold void they had created. I slowly lifted my right hand. I grasped the heavy diamond wedding ring that had shackled me to this toxic illusion for years. I pulled it off my finger and simply let it drop. The heavy diamond hit the polished marble floor. The sharp metallic clink cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a gunshot, ringing out cold and final as the ring rolled away into the shadows. I turned my back on them for the last time. David and my elite security detail immediately formed a human wall, stepping in to block Marcus as he tried to lunge after me. The guards effortlessly parted the sea of stunned, breathless billionaires, carving a clear path through the center of the crowd. If a camera were following me, it would be tracking steadily backward, capturing my immaculate posture and fixed gaze as I walked away, leaving the screaming bankrupt and publicly disgraced family shrinking into the background. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air. A sleek armored Maybach waited at the curb, the rear door already held open by my driver. I slipped into the plush leather interior. The heavy door shut with a solid, isolating thud, instantly sealing out the noise of the ruined gala. The engine purred to life and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the glowing city traffic. They call me cold-blooded, but they forgot a very simple truth. If you want to stand at the absolute pinnacle of an empire you built with your own two hands, you must learn how to surgically extract the malignant tumors. I am Adeline, and I do not seek revenge. I simply take back the crown they thought I was unworthy to wear.